Shields up, Ironbreakers. Work here coming at you with another video, and welcome back to Core Gameplay, the series where I show you guys a nice chunk of gameplay from a video game and tell you guys my particular opinions on that game. In this episode of Core Gameplay, we're going to be featuring 9 Parchments, which is a title that is available currently for PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch. Personally, I wanted to play it on the Nintendo Switch because, as you guys know, I really like the platform, and pretty much I take any chance I get to play a new game on that console. So the footage that you guys are watching is actually taken from the Switch itself, and what is 9 Parchments all about? Well, in its essence, it's a bit of a mix match between an RPG and a twin-stick shooter. You're going to be in control of a specific wizard. You'll have multiple wizards that you can unlock as you play through the game and fulfill certain things, like killing a certain number of enemies with death spells, or killing enemies with fireballs, or killing enemies with all different elements. Now, I'm sure that as you guys are watching some of the gameplay in this video, you're going to be seeing somewhat of a familiar gameplay style to another title that already exists, which is obviously Magicka. Now, this game does seem to take a lot of inspiration from Magicka, at least that's what it looks like to me personally. The main difference is that in this game you actually level up. There is actually a progression system, and you do unlock different wizards which come pre-equipped with different spells. There's multiple difficulty levels, and as you play through the different difficulty levels, you will also be able to unlock different things. Specifically, some of the most powerful characters in game, which you can level up all the way to level 60, are only available to be unlocked in hardcore mode, which is the game's hardest difficulty available. If you don't go into hardcore mode, you can only really level up to level 40. However, leveling up in this game, to be completely honest, does not seem particularly important, at least from my first impressions. Do bear in mind, I've only played a couple of hours just to get to grips with the title. And basically, to me, it seems that it's more about playing with friends than necessarily bothering too much with leveling up. Obviously, leveling up your character will get more powerful. There are specific things in your talent tree that sort of give you additional spell regeneration, or additional damage on your spells, so it will have an impact. But it seems to me like actually figuring out how to better combine your beams and into more deadly beams that you shoot up against your enemies seems to be a more effective way of actually dispatching enemies than necessarily leveling up by yourself. Now, obviously, as you guys can see, the game is being played by 4 players right now. This was me using the online co-op because I didn't really have anyone available locally to play the game with me, which you can do on the Nintendo Switch, and I thought it was actually pretty cool, the fact that you're able to, once again, just take the 2 Joy-Cons and you have 2-player co-op action right there, and to me, that is probably one of the major selling points of a game like 9 Parchments, is the fact that if you have a Switch, you can just like play with your friend right there. And you guys are like, oh, but how are the controls on the Joy-Cons? And yeah, that's a little bit complicated because, like I said, this is very much a twin-stick shooter. So therefore, a lot of times you will want to be strafing back, backpedaling, and still aiming a spell towards your enemies. And you can still do that with the Joy-Cons, even though you don't have the second analog stick. You can still do it by using the faceplate buttons. They still allow you to aim in 8 different directions. And you guys are like, wow, really? They did that with the faceplate buttons? And yes, they did. You can still do it, but it's a little bit trickier. It's going to take a little bit longer to really get used to it if you have additional controllers, so you can actually have your friends have 2 analog sticks. It is a much better experience than necessarily using the Joy-Cons, but still, it's a nice thing that they did it in a way that you can use the Joy-Cons in order to have just like local co-op from the get-go with your friends if you want to. So that's cool beans, and it is something that I really appreciate when video game developers try to do. Now, what are the major differences in a game like this in Magicka? Because like I said, the gameplay is going to feel very similar to that of Magicka. Well, in Magicka, you would usually combine the different elements, and the way in which you would combine the elements, that would make the spell that you would cast be different. And so essentially you had a wide variety of spells so long as you knew the order in which to cast those specific elements and to combine those elements in certain ways. Well, This particular game, Nine Parchments right here, actually takes a different approach and makes the spell casting system quite a bit more simple, but at the same time, that also ensures that you're not making as many mistakes as you no doubtedly did. I know I did a lot of mistakes when I played through Magicka. Using this system is a lot more simple. So the way it works is, as you begin playing the game, each of the wizards is going to have a default setup of spells. So depending on the wizard that you choose, you're going to have different spells. So for instance, the two starting characters, which are the ones I've spent the most time with, one of them has a ice beam. He shoots out fireballs, which actually deal AoE damage, and he also has this AoE death spell that he casts. The other character has an AoE healing spell, and then she has an AoE lightning-like cone ability and a death beam. Now, beams, in my opinion, are some of the most important spells when it comes to this specific game, because you can combine beams to like form different things. So say you have a character that has the ice beam and another character that has the death beam. You can actually shoot both beams together, and then those beams will like form a super like cold death beam, which is going to deal additional damage and will also be able to have additional effects, like it will also deal damage over time, and so on and so forth. But now you guys are like, well, that seems pretty limiting. I mean, 3 spells per wizard and you get that for the rest of the game? No, that's where the 9 parchments come into play. The way this works is you have a certain number of regular levels as you play through the game, and as you progress through those regular levels, you will eventually come onto a special level, and that is one of the parchment levels. And once you complete that, which will usually have something a little bit out of the ordinary, I've had a boss fight against a giant maggot-looking thing, and then I've also had an arena-type fight where we had all these crazy bull-rushing creatures coming at us. And as you finish those levels, then you get one of the parchments. And what happens with one of the parchments is you get to customize your character in different ways. And that is kind of like when things begin to get a little bit more interesting. So customizing your character, basically you're going to get an additional spell. They're going to give you 3 spells to choose from, and the spell that you choose then instantly becomes available to you. So you're going to basically, every time you go through a parchment level, you're going to be able to customize your character with a new spell. So some characters might want the healing, little healing circle thing. I personally went with a fire-breathing totem, which also caused my my partners in this particular session to die multiple times, because that fire-breathing totem had a really long range, which was very satisfying to use and at the same time very dangerous, because obviously you're going to have friendly fire. I mean, why wouldn't you want friendly fire in a game where you're casting all kinds of destructive spells and destroying everything that is showing up on screen? It just makes it that much fun if you're killing your friends along the way. However, whenever you kill someone, you're also able to resurrect them by standing close to their corpse for a certain period of time. So that's kind of like how the mechanic works. Very much in the same way as Magicka, whenever you would cast a particularly destructive spell, you could get all of your friends killed. The same thing happens in this game. But I do have to say, I kind of felt the deaths in Magicka were a little bit more satisfying because of the physics engines, which I really think that is something 9 Parchments could have added as well for a little bit more flavor. Because like in Magicka, whenever you would kill one of your friends, most likely his body would like end up flailing through the air. And here you just kind of die, fall to the floor, and then someone has to resurrect you. So it is a little bit more simplistic in that regard as well. But ultimately, how does it feel to actually play 9 Parchments? Does it feel good? And that's where I'm a little bit conflicted, because this is one of those games that is great if you're playing with friends. If you're playing by yourself, it doesn't feel nearly as interesting. I almost wish they would have added like AI characters, at least 1 or 2 AI characters to play with you, so that you could still combine beam spells and do all of those interesting things. Because if you're playing by yourself, for starters, it becomes a lot more challenging. So if you're into more challenging games, I mean, obviously you're going to enjoy, if you enjoy this kind of gameplay, it becomes a lot more challenging playing by yourself. But at the same time, it's not as satisfying. It's not as fun. There's not as many accidents. People don't die as often. So it's basically more of a skill type thing. You're just playing it for the skill. You're just trying to get through it and move on and play through the different levels, acquire all the different spells. You're going to have to be very much more of a one-man army than what you're watching in this gameplay, which is just 4 people going at it. And like I said, this particular gameplay is online, which I haven't played a lot of games online using the Switch, if I'm to be completely honest. At the start of each level, I always had some kind of weird lag. I'm not sure if that was just my internet provider or if it was due to me being maybe too far away from some of these other players. But it seemed that after that initial lag, which would usually take about 30 to 20 seconds or so, after that, the lag was pretty much not that noticeable anymore. So the netcode felt pretty solid for the most part. There were a couple of times where I kind of felt like, whoa, I was lagging a little bit here. But again, I'm assuming that for a smaller studio like this, I don't assume they're using dedicated servers. I mean, how could you? So it's going to be very much peer-to-peer, and it's going to be depending on who the host is and all of that jazz. You can also create your own sessions if you want to just play with friends and stuff like that. And again, like I said, this game is going to be way more fun if you are playing it with friends, particularly if you're able to have like some kind of voiceover program so that you guys can actually say, hey, I'm going to throw the big AoE spell over there, because every time I threw my totem, it almost felt like, well, I'm just going to dick everybody over and just throw my big totem and just have massive AoE damage going off on screen. So again, this is a game really, really benefits from being played in co-op. I would not advise you to get this game to just play solo unless you find the gameplay that you're watching so good that you just can't wait to get your hands on it. Then hey, that's up to you. But in my opinion, this game is going to be much better being played by multiple players. Even if it's just 2 players, it makes all the difference in the world than playing alone. Also, like I said, it becomes a lot more challenging playing alone, because basically you're not going to have anyone to resurrect you. Whereas if you're playing with at least 2 players, you're able to resurrect each other if one of you dies. The game also appears to scale based around on the number of players that are in there, because I definitely noticed a lot more enemies when I was playing with these 3 guys than when I was playing by myself. Also, if you guys notice, throughout most of this footage, you will see that there are 2 characters in there named the Tid. That is because it was me and another player playing on Switch, and then there was another player who was using the 2-player mode on his local console to play. So basically, you can have 2 players on a console and then jump into the online game mode and still get more players and play 4-player co-op that way, if that is something that you want to do. Overall, I found the experience pretty satisfying. The downside to it, I want to say, is that it gets a little bit repetitive, basically. Because, I mean, what you're watching in the gameplay is what you're going to be doing throughout most of the game. I only got like the 2 parchments or something, and then I stopped because I wanted to do the video, give you guys my first impressions on it. But it's mostly just go around, kill a bunch of creatures, acquire more spells. There's also a loot system, so you'll be able to get specific staffs, which will change some of the stats in your character. Like some staffs will give you critical damage. Other stats will benefit specific elemental types. So you will unlock those staffs as you play through the game. And you'll also unlock different hats. But as far as I can tell, the hats are mostly cosmetic, so it's not a big deal. On top of unlocking different wizards, because you will unlock different wizards beyond the ones you guys are watching here. I mean, these are mostly people that I'm assuming started playing the game today. I'm not entirely sure. But as you unlock different wizards, you also will unlock different versions of the base wizard. So for instance, the very basic male wizard that you can start with begins with Fireball, Ice Beam, and the AoE Death Spell. But I already unlocked a different version of that same wizard who begins the game with different spells. And you guys are like, so why does it matter to unlock all of these different wizard types? Well, because there's a bit of a roguelike element to this game if you are playing it in hardcore mode, because whenever you die, and you have to start from scratch. But you're still unlocking stuff. You're still progressing towards unlocking new wizards and unlocking new variations on the existing wizards that you have, which ultimately gives you a different gameplay experience. And in a way, I kind of find that there is value in the system, because I know that a lot of people are going to be like, oh, but in Magicka, I could cast every single spell with my character. Therefore, wasn't that a better way of doing things? And it's like, well, the way it works in 9 Parchments is you're actually going to have a role kind of assigned to your character if you're playing with friends. You will have someone that maybe wants to specialize in fire spells, or maybe someone who wants to specialize in being a healer and that kind of stuff. And so you will develop further in those trees instead of everyone being able to do everything. So you can kind of specialize and you know, cast specific spells that way. And it's going to depend on personal preference. Some people prefer it the way Magicka does it. Other people will prefer the way this game does it. Like I said, one of the main advantages of the way this game does it is that it is simpler, it is easier to get into, and you don't have to be explaining to people how to cast a specific spell by casting, oh, for that spell, you go fire, fire, life, death, earth, and you're just like, what? There's also an ability to blink, and there's also staffs that benefit from that ability. You guys will have seen me cast a bunch of blinks throughout. The way the mana system works in this game, which I guess I should have mentioned that a little bit earlier, is as you cast spells, each spell has its own mana bar. So the idea is that you cast a spell, then you switch to a different spell, you cast that spell, and then when you switch back to the other spell, the mana will have regenerated. So they want you to actively cycle through spells. Now, obviously, the thing about it is that certain monsters are going to be weaker to certain elements, and this begins instantly right at the start of the game. They will put ice monsters on you, and you will have to use fire against them, or anything else other than ice, because they will be immune to ice damage. The same thing for fire, same thing for life, and lightning, and steam, and there's all these different elements that you will have to learn and figure out how they work together. There'll also be barrels that you can explode, and they will deal AoE damage, stuff like that. Always remember, though, there is friendly fire as well as enemy healing. So if you cast a healing spell and an enemy stands in it, they can heal as well. So every spell affects everyone equally. However, there's also the interesting factor here that sometimes you'll have enemies that are using the element, so to speak, element of death. And you can use heal to deal damage onto those enemies. So your healing spell essentially becomes a damaging spell for death enemies. Same way that holy spells affect undead creatures in D&D, so to speak. So it is, overall, in my opinion, it has the makings of a good game. Like I said, the main drawback of it is that it is somewhat repetitive. You go through these levels, you get new spells, your character becomes more complex to play, and you repeat until you get to the end, at which point I don't know what's going to happen. Also, you do have a skill tree that you will level up your character as you continue to play the game, and that skill tree you can influence stuff like how fast your mana regen, how much damage you're going to be dealing with your spells, and other things as you level up more and more. So like I said, it's a pretty fun game, especially if you are on the Switch, because again, you can just like hand off the Joy-Con to someone else and share the joy and just play multiplayer right there. And that to me is probably going to be what I'm going to be using it more for with my friends, and try to get people to actually play with me, even using the Joy-Cons in the share joy mode, which you know, some people are still very skeptical about it. I think it's a lot of fun, but you know, it's going to be up to each individual person. Thank you all very much for watching the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.